Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today from Needham, Massachusetts is George Aghjayan, who is an actuarian, but we're here talking to him for April 24th because George also spends a good deal of time following the studying and helping us understand the demographics of Western Armenia, of the lands that are now part of Eastern Turkey. George, thank you for joining us on CivilNet.
Thank you, Salpi, for inviting me.
You're going to talk about something that people don't usually talk about. You've taken these numbers, these abstract 1.5 million numbers, and turned them into real people. Tell us how you started to study, in this case, baptism records. We read about your work in the Armenian Weekly, and we're going to give a link to it here on this report. You published baptism records from the Armenian Church in Gesaria, in Kayseri. How did that happen?
Well, I think it was a circuitous route, so to speak. It was the marriage of my professional background with my deep passion for my Armenian heritage. So as an actuary, I deal clearly with numbers and with demographics. And in insurance business, that's what my background is, my professional background. But naturally also I have this political work or passion in my Armenian heritage that led me to also expanding that beyond just the general statistics to also personal and genealogy. Way back when, at the beginning of the internet age, I had started actually a website for Armenian genealogy, and I tried to help Armenians that were researching their heritage to find a way to explore the records that exist.
That was you!
Yes, that's right. Most people think that all the records have been destroyed, and while that's largely the case, there are resources for Armenians that have an interest. And I found that particularly here in the United States, where Armenians are so assimilated, I found that it kept them interested in their Armenian heritage by talking about their families and what was available for them to find out about the history of their own personal families. So
and that was evidenced by all of the comments and the reactions to your article in the Armenian Weekly.
Yeah, absolutely. And over the years, I've gotten hundreds of requests from people just trying to find out whether it's about the villages that they came from. Of course, the village names have changed and many of the locations are obscure. People don't know anymore where the villages were or where they are currently, if they still exist or not, what their current names are, and that sort of information. So that's another aspect of my research, which is documenting exactly where the villages were, the exact longitude and latitude, what the villages are called today, how many Armenians live there, what's available from a demographic analysis, which of course has an interest to genocide historians, but also from a genealogical perspective. And that's really what led to this Gesaria baptism, as it's the only, as far as I know, the only Armenian church, apostolic church within the interior of modern Turkey, outside of Istanbul, where the church records actually exist, pre-genocide records actually exist.
And these records also exist in the Patriarchate?
Yes, that's where they came from. They're from the Patriarchate. They've been microfilmed, and that's the resource I've been using. The records for this particular church start in 1902. They carry through to 1915, and then they stop in April of 1915, and then they don't start again until 1919, August of 1919.
It's when that the church, specific, huh? They stop in April of 1915.
Yes, it's dramatic, actually, when you look at it. And in fact, a few pages before that, some of the records pages have been ripped, so some of the information has been lost, but you can see that the book that they were kept in, clearly went through some trauma at the time as well as the people there. And it occurred to me, this has actually been in the works for a while, or been on my mind for a while. I was glad that we were finally able to put it in the Armenian Weekly, starting at the beginning of this year, because, people were being born, they were being wed, they were having baptisms, And little did they know that within a short period of a year and a half, that everything was going to change. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And that gets back to your original question of how do you turn cold, hard numbers and statistics into understanding from the personal and human side of things what was transpiring. And I find that when you start looking at these records, you can't help but be influenced by the people involved.
Tell us the process. Are you working backwards? Are you going from 1915 back? Are you doing any sort of double checking, or is that really not important? Because I assume baptismal records, like mine, right? They would have my parents' names and they would probably have everything that's needed, no?
Well, I think what I'm doing is, first of all, I wanted to get this year and a half done to take us right till April 2015, 100 years ago, April 1915. So I started there and I completed all of that year. And then I went back to 1902, and I've been gradually working forward because my goal is to have them all transcribed and entered into a database and hopefully published, really. I have this interest in, I think that there's so much interest in them out there that it's worthwhile in having them published. And along with that is some of the things you're talking about. So my first pass is just simply a transcription, entering into a database. The standardization of names and things like that will come later. Possibly also just something that talks about what some of these names mean, what the translation is, how the families maybe got those names. And then there's also an aspect, and this is what you were talking about as well, is that the people that are responding to the ones on the Armenian Weekly website are telling me what's happened to some of these people. And I think that's important to know as well. Those I'd love to include in the book small biographies or some indication of what happened to these. And I've gotten emails from around the world of people that have found their relatives.
Give us some stories.
Yeah, well, one in particular I think is moving. This woman that wrote that, her father never knew his date of birth, and that's so true of so many of the survivors. They didn't really know their exact date of birth. And she found her father's baptismal record in these records. And it was an amazing story because the last name for them was Dilsizian. And the family had gotten the name because their ancestor had had his tongue cut out because he spoke Armenian. And that's the story that had been handed down to them. So it was a fascinating story and really rewarding. Some other people have put me in contact with the Compatriotic Union of Gesaria in Lebanon, and I think there's an interest there as well. Clearly they have an interest in the heritage of their village.
Let me understand about the availability. If someone were to go to the Patriarchate and wanted to do the same thing with Harpert or with Van, you're saying they would or wouldn't be able to? Are those records there?
No, they're not for those areas. As I said, this is the sole place. I mean, it's fits and stops. I'm not sure if you've seen. There are some records from Van that I've seen. That I know the Patriarchate has, some tax registers that are predate the genocide. I've seen them. I haven't gone back to look at them, but I have seen them. I haven't seen them at the Patriarchate, actually. I've seen them. The Mormon Church actually microfilmed the records of the Patriarchate as well as some other records, and they're available there on microfilm, and that's the source and the location of where I was able to get the records from. I didn't have to go. While I've been to the Patriarchate, I had not used their archives there.
Last question. Gesaria, have you been?
Yes, Gesaria, I was able to go. The first time I went to Turkey was in 1996, and I got very close, but was not able to visit Gesaria. Part of my family came from just north of Gesaria, Burunkishla, in the district of Yozgat, the Boghazlian district of Yozgat. And so I had hoped to get there, and I wasn't able to get there. It was only last May that I was finally, after almost 20 years, able to get to both Gesaria, the church here. I was able to visit the church, and also to go to Burunkishla. And there was an interest in these records for myself as well, as I found the baptismal record of what I believe to be my grandfather's nephew. I mean, my last name is uncommon even as Armenians go, and of course that village being the size it was, we were the only family in that village with this last name. So finding an Aghjayan from Burunkishla being baptized in Gesaria made perfect sense. And so, you know, and I knew my grandfather had numerous brothers, most of which had not survived the genocide. So, you know, there was that as well. These records, by the way, even though it's Gesaria, because Gesaria was such a hub for commerce, there are people being baptized there that came from other places as well. In fact, just the other day, amazingly, I found a record of somebody being baptized from Marash, which is where my brother-in-law is from, and it was his name, Gesaria, and the baptismal name, the person being mentioned, Gulazar, he heard that name growing up in Lebanon. So again, you know, you find these links that are just amazing that you don't expect to find.
Thank you. Thank you, George Aghjayan, who is doing the detailed work necessary to turn these numbers, the 1.5 million number, into real people. Thank you, George, for talking to us on CivilNet.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for following us on CivilNet.